Welcome to Discograffiti's 2025 Patreon membership super drive. Now more than ever with our Beach Boys series underway, much of which will be living exclusively on our Patreon platform, this is the time to join, and I'm going to make it super easy for you. At the lieutenant or major tier, in addition to 3 or 4 shows a week, access to the gigantic archive of Patreon back episodes, and your backstage pass, you'll also get the following. An onboarding call with me during which you'll tell me all your ideas on how to make the podcast you'd like to hear. And whether I use all, some, or none of your ideas, I'll have listened closely and most importantly gotten to know you. Plus, 3 months into your membership, you'll be eligible to appear on the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. That's right, an entire episode all about you, your band, your band's album, your band's tour, or whatever other cool stuff you might be up to. And not only do we make the episode, we promote it for you too. Last but not least, you'll receive a completely free digital copy of Metal Machine Muzak, which otherwise costs $11. Metal Machine Muzak is Discograffiti's double album Lou Reed tribute featuring 16-minute pieces by Lou Barlow from Sebado and Dino Jr., Corey Hansen from Wand, Mark Robinson from Unrest, and W. Cullen Hart from Olivia Tremor Control. Please tell all your music-obsessive friends. In fact, if your friends do sign up, be sure to email me at info@discograffiti.com and let me know who they are, because I'll be sending you an additional surprise gift on top of everything else as a token of my gratitude. And now, without further ado, the greatest music commentary podcast in all the land, I bring you Discograffiti. I find David to be an absolutely fascinating person, both in his life and in his work. Obviously, you do too, or you wouldn't have written a book about him.
No, he's a complex person, but he is an intellectual. And you cannot say that about any of the Wilson brothers. You cannot say that about Mike Love. You cannot say that about Al Jardine. Those are the people.
Let's not forget Bruce Johnston, please.
Let's not. But David is his own worst enemy as well.
A lot of intellectuals follow that same path.
Was never good at promoting himself. Didn't really even understand what it was that was important that he had contributed. But on the other hand, he does feel wronged. He's a part of the fingerprint, the stamp that was put into the popular culture. He is a part of that. He should have been rewarded for that.
Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series, And Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 45 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to Jeff McAvoy and especially co-producer Dennis Dyken, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on David Marks after he left the Beach Boys. Along with our special guest, David Marks biographer and Beach Boys author, Jon Stebbins. Here's just a few of the many things that Jon and I discuss in this podcast. A postscript commentary on Discograffiti's controversial David Marks interview with a man who knows him better than most. Some of the wild behavior that got David sacked from the Beach Boys, how David's income was cut off months before David was actually removed from the band, Murray Wilson's bizarre, vengeful campaign to squash any chances that David Marks and the Marksmen may have had at being successful, while simultaneously offering them assistance too, and the ways in which LSD began to color his musical stylings during the late 1960s. If you're a Beach Boys superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 11 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or better yet, just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. I recommend the Lieutenant tier at the very least so you can access those director's cuts, but the major tier is what you want if you want it all. Even if you're on the fence, just head over there because it's finally free to become a basic member. Coming up, we've got Al Jardine, Marilyn Wilson, Don Was, Ginger Blake, Pete Buck, Ira Kaplan from Yo La Tengo, The Cars' Elliot Easton, Sonic Boom, Don Fleming, Marshall Crenshaw, Russ Titleman, Jerry Schilling, Greg Jacobson, Christian Love, Gary Griffin, David Beard, Probin Gregory, John Cowsill, David Leaf, Don Randy, Rob Bonfilio, Wyatt Funderburk, Stephen Kalinich, Matt Jardine, Fred Vale, Sam Parker, Brent Wilson, Mark Lynette, Alan Boyd, Carly Minoz, and many more. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. Today's guest is a musician, songwriter, documentary producer, and author of 4 books about the Beach Boys, in addition to 2 other non-Beach Boy books. His first, Dennis Wilson, The Real Beach Boy, was published in 2000 and was ranked as the #2 bestseller in Mojo magazine that year. In 2007, he collaborated with David Marks on The Lost Beach Boy, which tells the story of Mark's time with the band in 1962 to 63, plus his experiences after he left the group. Then came the Beach Boys FAQ, All That's Left to Know About America's Band, an extensive reference book published in September 2011. 2013 brought the Beach Boys in Concert, the complete history of America's band on tour and on stage, co-written with Ian Rustin, a daily journal of the group's 50-year touring history. He also contributed research and liner notes to the 2008 Legacy Edition CD release of Dennis Wilson's Pacific Ocean Blue, Rolling Stone's 2008 reissue of the year. He's been a producer and creative contributor to BBC TV documentaries, including The Beach Boys' Wouldn't It Be Nice from 2005, and co-producer of the 2010 BBC TV doc Legends, Dennis Wilson, The Real Beach Boy. Lads and ladies who think that writing 3 or less Beach Boys books makes you nothing more than a lazy Johnny-come-lately, have we got the guy for you. And he'll be back for the late 60s and mid-70s seasons as well, so there's no need to weep when this episode's complete. He's a shoo-in as a finalist for Discograffiti's and Your Dreams Come True recurring character sweepstakes. It's Jon Stebbins!
Hey, Dave. Greetings from California. The ocean is right there. I'm looking at it.
Right there?
It's right there. It's right there, man. Right outside my window.
Now, were you seduced by the California myth, or were you born and bred?
Well, I was born in Northern California, East Bay area, so like 40 minutes from San Francisco. But really where I grew up was more of like wine country or kind of redneck ranchville. But yeah, I was seduced by it, mainly seduced by it through the music. And my sisters were older than me, and they had acquired those early Beach Boys albums. So those were part of my household. When I was 5 or 6, I was already being seduced by that beach culture thing.
So, first thing that I want to address before we dive in and talk about the David Marks story is the David Marks interview, which was always meant to, even before the interview was done, was always meant to kick off the series. And then when I got the interview, I sat on it for a few months, just waiting for the series to begin. Then, I have actually been deemed naive by the co-producer Dennis Dykin when I explained to him that I wasn't expecting there to be such a groundswell of controversy around it. I really didn't, because what people don't understand, and I'm talking to you about this because there may be nobody standing except the guys in the band who know David as well as you do. And what people don't understand, they think that I stole this interview, that I cribbed it, and that I put it up without his knowledge. But what strikes me as odd about that is you can clearly hear David give me the go-ahead during the interview. And not only that, but a lot of the interview, at least in the beginning, is me trying to not only get an interview with him, but to reschedule it so that this is not the interview, but that we can do an actual formal interview.
I've heard there's a little buzz going around about this interview.
Yeah. I got a phone call from somebody who actually tried to bribe me, in a sense, to take the interview down. He's a filmmaker who I'm guessing is friends with David Marks. And I don't know if it was at David's behest. I don't think it was, because David has my number. And not only that, but I had attempted to get in touch with David Marks, I'm going to guess probably about 30 times, because also I knew he was hospitalized and I wanted to know he was okay. And I tried to get in touch with him to let him know that I was running the interview. I was going to do it in 2 parts. And I always give people the benefit of the doubt beforehand if there's anything that they don't want to cover. I did it with Michelle Phillips. I did it with Carney Wilson. Anyone especially who's got sort of hot topic items in their backstory, I want to make sure they're okay with stuff. And David, he either never picked up or maybe he blocked my number.
There is a long history of getting that sort of flavor of David, from phone calls, late night phone calls and all that. So it's not surprising to me.
I mean, when my mom was dying, like the day that she died, I don't know if this was, an old guy fuddy-duddy using a cell phone kind of a thing, but he accidentally, quote unquote, called me. And he did that on a number of other occasions that seemed like odd moments, but he never addressed the interview. And anyway, so this guy named Michael Campion called me. He's a filmmaker, and I don't know if he was put up to doing this or somebody in the Beach Boys organization asked him to be the fall guy to do this, but he offered me some shitty interview that he had with David Marks that probably was safe and included zero honesty. What I like about the interview is that it felt honest to me. I don't care that he was fucked up on drugs and alcohol. To me, there's zero appeal there. To me, that's rocket fuel to get all the honesty out. My show is the pursuit of honesty. That's what you're here for. That's what I'm here for. I don't let myself off the hook on that as well. If I feel like I'm holding back, then I fucked up my own show. So
have you been continuing to get fallout? Have you had pressure from other people or judgment from other people?
This morning, somebody sent me $15 as a tip and then wrote, "The most excruciating yet fascinating interview I have ever heard anywhere on any subject." I've gotten a lot of feedback like that. One person wrote, "It's the best podcast interview I've ever heard in my life." I've gotten a lot like that, but I've also gotten a lot, especially snowflakes in the Beach Boys universe, who feel like I wronged David by running this. To me, that's presupposing that David didn't want this run. I have no evidence that David didn't want this run because he didn't know me from a bucket of paint, and he went ahead and said a bunch of stuff that I felt he was ready to say, regardless of who was on the other end of the line. And he said that stuff. I ran it. There didn't seem anything confusing about the transaction that took place.
Whether David would have wanted that run or not would depend on the David, because there's two sides. And there's, for most people, there's two sides, especially when you get into this world. What I would say is that, personally, it's sad for me, but it seems like something like this is inevitable with him because of the state that he's been in for the past 2-3 years. I love David, but I love the David that I knew when we were writing the book, which was, 20 years sober David, one of the best people in the world. So much fun to be around and really smart, really insightful. The other side of David is the guy that calls at 11 at night and tells you you're basically evil or the devil, or, he's called me everything from a shitty writer to a thief to, all these other things. So I prefer to remember the David that, I worked together with for all those years on that book, and the David that has helped me move from one house to the other and has hung out with my kids and played guitar with me. And, beautiful guy. Where he ended up is sad. I hope that he's going to rebound out of it. He has in the past. He's pretty resilient. But again, whether it was you or whether it was me or whether it was someone else, I think that this type of thing being exposed was inevitable. And I do think there's a ton of honesty in what he's projecting there, because even the sober David is going to tell you a lot of that type of stuff off the record. Some of it actually on the record as well. If you're to read my book or some of the other interviews that he's done, there are threads of this, hints of this type of thing throughout it. He did not have a lot of respect for the Beach Boys, just in general. I mean, we could start there. I kind of had to reteach him to love his part of the Beach Boys because he was in denial about it being anything. He has a different kind of taste in music, and I think he considers himself more progressive or maybe more technically proficient in some ways as a musician than any of those guys. And he's worked with some pretty heavy people in his life. So, I mean, he has credibility to be able to say that. But I think his denial about the Beach Boys, also comes with a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of regret mixed into it. He has to sort of re-engage with all of that stuff to be able to love the Beach Boys again. So it was easy for him to hate the Beach Boys because then he can push away the regret. He can push away the emotionally damaging kind of vibes that come with it.
I'm proud of David, but people like the Michael Campions of the world, I've been doing this show for over 3 years. I've never had a gross, creepy phone call like that in my life, where somebody was, sort of creeping around, looking to replace something that really hit the nail on the head of what I was going for, and looking to replace it with something that, in my eyes, was totally worthless. So in the Beach Boys world, I think it's about, especially for the people who are super, super gung-ho major fans, it's about one's own loyalty to their own perception of the Beach Boys legacy. Because that intertwines with one's own childhood and intertwines with one's own notions of how things should be, not the way they actually are. And I would much rather know what actually happened. And I'm proud of David. If there's even, a shred of truth in what he said, it was totally worth, having gone through this slalom of craziness, trying to understand people's polarized perception of the two episodes.
Dave, I'm used to this. I'm used to ending up being the guy that is being told one of the quotes, he told too many of Dennis's secrets, so I'm not going to be included in whatever this next Dennis project is. I mean, this is going back to late 90s, 2000. Well, let me give you an example, the Disney documentary. So when that was in production, I was brought in to the offices, the production offices of where it was being created. And one of the producers, who I won't mention, had all my books there laid out on a desk, telling me they were using my books as reference for the documentary. I was asked to sign these copies of the book and given a lot of nice compliments about it and how useful my research was to them in creating this documentary. And then, shortly after, I was told, well, I'm sorry, we can't hire you as a consultant because, they feel that you've been actually too honest in your writings and some of the principals, won't approve your participation in this. However, you'll be thanked in the credits because we've been using your books. So, a year goes by or whatever. Honestly, I don't give a fuck, but I did look through the credits of that thing and my name's nowhere to be found. So wow. I'm used to that. That's one example. I could give you 20. So you're going to get judged. You expose something, whether it's true or not, whether it's real or not. There's certain people that bend over backwards to play ball and to not upset anybody. And it's a very stressful place to be. And then there's people like me who kind of don't give a shit anymore. I've kind of let it go. I don't need to be one of the cool inside people. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore. But I stand by the things I've written. They were written for the right reasons because I'm a fan and I love the music. And the music has definitely been an important part of my life. It still is. And so that's the essence of everything. That's where I'm coming from. But I'm not going to bullshit just to get by, just to be somebody's best friend. It's not going to happen.
Well, your work is priceless. And just like, it was nice and all to see the Disney documentary, it wasn't much more than that. I don't need, especially with this band, I don't need or want and have no desire for the whitewashed version of this story. There's so much under the surface that is of enormous interest for fans of the truth, for fans of music. I mean, if you want to just get, a heaping helping of real, true Americana, this is almost Lynchian Americana, what happens in this story. Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show per week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. Let's dive in then. Enough said about the fallout, or however you want to deem it. When last we had checked in with David Marks in our tale up to this point, it was August 30th, 1963, and on the drive from Wisconsin to Chicago, David Marks, who had just turned 15 8 days earlier, got into an argument with Murray, and if you were to believe him in the interview, he shoved his ass in Murray's face and farted, and then quit the group. He was on their way to their final concert in Brooklyn, and Murray honed in on David. Murray proclaimed if he didn't like the rules, he could leave, and that's when David promptly quit. Nobody took it seriously, but it wound up sticking. David remained a Beach Boy for 36 more days, and then it was all over. Although apparently he did come back and played on Don't Worry Baby and a few other tracks. There were about 10 more shows he played. The Be True to Your School single, and some songs from the Little Deuce Coupe LP. David admits that his attitude was terrible and the success was going to his head. David said, "So at that young and tender age, I got arrogant. I was a star, right? I thought I had it made. So I started getting real cocky. We always had to carry our amps in suitcases, and I started refusing to carry mine. Murray would yell at me, but I wouldn't care. I started singing She's Real Fine, My 69, and Little Douche Kit on stage, and Murray would find me. He'd find me for not smiling on stage, too. Finally, it ended. I wanted to be in control. I wanted to write my own songs. I wanted to emulate Brian. After I left the group, I had $22,000 in a trust fund that my folks had set up for me. Then during the 60s, I'd get $7,000 to $8,000 every 6 months. After the split, I wasn't sure what to do, so I saw a buddy I'd met through Carl, a drummer who was fooling around with a garage band at Hawthorne High. I walked in and said, 'All right, guys, I'm taking over. Gonna make you stars.' So we became Dave and the Marksmen, the first rock band to be signed to A&M. We recorded, went on a tour of California, got airplay on all the local stations, met a lot of boss jocks, but didn't sell any records. After a year, it folded, and I found myself taking a lot of LSD and laying on my back in Venice, California. There's also, by the way, Jon, there's a great quote. In Mike Love's memoir, there's a paragraph that kind of feels amazing to me because he comes right out and said that we ripped David off. We, meaning Mike, comes right out and says it. I want to read this too, only because I feel like it's important as far as the legalities of all this, because I don't know how that works, but this seems pretty blatant to me. So this is a direct quote from Mike's book. David's contributions have often been overlooked. He played his electric Fender Stratocaster with panache and swagger on our first 4 LPs and on some of our biggest songs, including Surfin' USA, Little Deuce Coupe, and 409, all before he was old enough to drive. But as his parents feared, my uncle exploited him. When David left the Beach Boys, he signed an agreement that he was no longer a member as of August 30th, 1963. That seemingly nullified the contract with Capitol that he had signed a year earlier, but that contract, approved by the LA Superior Court, stipulated that the court had to approve any change in his status. The court, however, was never informed of David's departure and therefore did not approve it, which meant the terms of the original contract remained in force until 1969. In other words, David was denied artist royalties that he was owed for 6 years. His share was absorbed by the rest of the band. Let me reread that. His share was absorbed by the rest of the band. David's parents, a blue-collar worker and a homemaker, didn't realize what they were doing, and David didn't discover the betrayal until more than 40 years later, too late to recover the millions of dollars that he'd lost. Break that down for me, if you will, about how Mike is able to talk in such an upfront way about having just picked him apart like buzzards and how he's able to just be honest like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that quote from Mike, the contractual part of it, was actually lifted out of my book, David, my book. But I think that was the first time that was actually put forth in the public forum like that. And it's worded very similarly, except I think the original contract ran through 1967, not 1969. But yes, David unknowingly, because of his exit agreement that he signed from Murray, was not legally binding because of no parent or no person who wasn't a minor had approved it.
Right.
I think that, he unknowingly owned 20% of the Beach Boys through 1967, whenever that Capitol contract ran out, original Capitol contract. So, a lot of that is true. I think mostly true. His parents did have a role in kind of brainwashing him into thinking he could be something on his own. I don't think it was just him and his 14-year-old or 15-year-old self that had this idea. I think his mom, David's mom, is a very unique person. She wanted to be a co-manager of the Beach Boys at the beginning, in those early days. She had a lot to do with getting them promoted, fan club type of stuff, like early on. But her and Murray clashed. And of course, Murray was going to make his sons the priority there. So David was never going to be a priority. But she fought for David to be more of a priority than he was. But he was cut off. I have records of the income that he was getting. And, whether it was because he started cursing or wouldn't carry his amp or whatever, there was a point where he stopped receiving income. And it was, while he was still playing in a band.
Wow.
Because I have records of he received, $300 for this gig, whatever. And then all of a sudden it stops. And it stops before he's gone. So
how long before he's gone?
Months.
Okay. Is it too late to do anything about that kind of stuff?
Well, unfortunately, he signed a more legally binding agreement when he was an adult, which was around 71. He received a settlement releasing any interest that he had. And at that time, I believe he considered himself to be a drug addict or whatever, but he did sign something in 71 for a settlement, which I believe was only like 15 grand or something. It was ridiculous. Jesus. And his lawyer approved this, but David will tell you that his attorney at that time was also the cocaine addict or whatever. So yeah, It's sad, but again, I think even with him signing, what is he, 23 or something, or 22 years old in 71, 23 maybe. I just think still, even with him signing that, he should have a piece of the Beach Boys franchise, because what do they use to promote themselves? Their image. What is the primary thing they use to promote themselves? It's those Paradise Cove photos. Anytime the iconic Beach Boys sort of image is promoted, 99% of the time it includes David. You know, he gets nothing for that. He gets nothing for T-shirt sales or whatever kind of merch sales, any of that stuff. Those guys should do the right thing. They should have done the right thing 25 years ago for him. You know, maybe it's not an equal piece, but he should be given a piece of that, whatever the sort of Beach Boys image that's being promoted and sold. Every time he's a part of that.
He was definitely fucked. I mean, there's no question about it. You know, people who equate David Marks with Pete Best are missing the point entirely. Pete Best was not a talented drummer. And that's why he's come up with, I counted 6 reasons why he could have been sacked. And not one of them included the fact that he doesn't know how to drum.
Pete Best is on no hit records. Right?
I mean, their career took off almost the minute Pete left the band, whereas David is on a ton of hits, and their sound owes a lot to David, not entirely to David.
When you think of the quintessential Beatles image, is Pete Best a part of that?
Yeah, not at all.
Okay, when you think of the iconic Beach Boys image, it's them on that Woody, it's them with the surfboard. David is part of that. His image is part of that. And so, you know, he should have gotten something. They should have done the right thing. What did Pete Best get? From what I understand, he got $1 million plus for the anthology.
Right. So it was in 1995 when he was finally...
30 years ago, right? I mean, the Beach Boys precede the Beatles. David's been waiting around for decades.
Listen, Pete got fucked too, because, you know, they said things in the media about him having a drug problem when that wasn't true. There was some weird stuff that went on there as well, but it's apples and oranges. These are not comparable situations.
You can't compare them.
But let's talk about the germination of the life outside of the Beach Boys for David. In February 1963, Dennis Wilson had been injured in a car accident. His replacement was Mark Grosclose. Mark Grosclose had gone to high school with Carl Wilson. Marks and Grosclose became friends, and David eventually took over Grosclose's garage band, which was named the Jaguars, which he renamed the Marksmen. The band was initially a side project for David, who was growing tired of his songs being passed over for inclusion on the records by, I think, both Brian and Murray, right?
Yeah, well, Brian essentially,
yeah. So after David left the Beach Boys, the Marksmen became his full-time focus and one of the first acts to be signed to A&M Records in '64.
First rock and roll act.
Right, first rock and roll act. Now, here's what I don't understand. Here's where I come into the table up to my eyeballs in research and still confused. Murray reportedly threatened radio DJs in order to keep them from playing the Marksmen's records. He wanted David to have zero success whatsoever, apparently. But Murray was involved with production on some of David's stuff, and David talks in pretty glowing terms about Murray. Now, what I suss about glowing terms when it comes to Murray is anyone who has screwed David, he seems to have some warmth for, because, and I'll just speak from my own personal experience, being knowledgeable about the addict alcoholic mentality. Sometimes people think that, you know, maybe I'm not deserving of the love of somebody who actually treats me like I deserve to be treated. Maybe all I deserve is to be shit on. And so if Murray and Mike allegedly, if you're just going to take David's word for it, are swindling him, then he's worthy of that kind of love. So maybe that at least explains that he still has respect for Murray. But what I don't understand is, how is Murray not only helping to produce some of this stuff for David, but actually getting Chuck Britz to be involved on some of it, you know, recording in the same studios? What's going on there?
You know, it's the two sides of everyone. David has a big brain, and that's one of the reasons why he's able to love some of the people that he hates. it's never black and white, and he knows that. He has a big enough brain. He's a deep enough person to know nothing is ever black and white.
Is there proof that he threatened radio DJs to keep them from playing the Marksmen's records?
I do not have the recorded proof of this, but I heard from Roger Christian's daughter that Roger would tell this story about being pressured by Murray. Roger Christian he co-wrote Don't Worry Baby and some other Beach Boys stuff, but he was also a very, very powerful and successful LA DJ. And he's the one who said, revealed that there was a pressure campaign from Murray. But the chronology of it is, it's hard to sort of unravel at this point. But what I've always thought is that Murray really respected David and what he was beginning to do with these musicians, because they're rehearsing across the street from where Murray lives. So there's a story in my book where Murray kind of wanders out and hears them and what they're doing. And if you listen to stuff they recorded, like Sheriff of Nottingham, it was actually, pretty cool. It was pretty great. And David was an excellent musician at that point, even though he's only 15 years old. I mean, he's proved that he's an excellent musician. Whether he has the chops as a songwriter or vocalist can be debated, but there's no debating whether he was a great musician or not. He was primed to be a very great musician. Murray had a good ear for things. I think he had offered to manage them. And, this is right around the same time that the Beach Boys are sort of getting tired of Murray's routine. And so there's a little bit of overlap there, but we're talking right around the time the Marksmen are getting going is the time that Murray's being told, we don't want you to be our manager anymore.
Right.
Murray's first offer to manage someone outside of the Beach Boys was David and Marksmen. So, eventually it became the Sunrays.
Right.
But Murray saw Dave and the Marksmen as maybe being like his next project.
And also it needs to be mentioned that David turned down Murray's offer to join the Sunrays too.
Yeah.
And he did take work as a session guitarist for a few Sunrays tunes.
That's right. That's because of Murray. So they had a little bit of a relationship going, but the relationship between David's mother and Murray was so bad and so toxic that was never going to work out. So David essentially had to turn Murray down for anything serious because of his mother. So I think, that semi-answers your question. How can these things be true? Well, all of this is kind of swirling around right at the same time, and also very close to the same time that the Beach Boys are rejecting Murray as their manager leader as well.
Right. And I know David had played Custom Car Show for Brian when Brian was assembling the Little Deuce Coupe LP. And obviously it would have been a semi-fit. Plus, they were in serious need of car songs because they were doing that quickly. So they needed car songs stat. But Brian rejected it and told him he wasn't quite ready as a songwriter. And that song, it feels less like the Beach Boys and more like the Sunrays. I still think it's better than I initially thought it would be, but I can see how David probably saw how this was going to work out, because the Marksmen's first single, engineered by Chuck Britz, recorded at Western 3, featuring the Honeys on backing vocals. Success probably seemed like a slam dunk given to David at that point.
Listen to it, though.
Right. That's the problem.
He's like a sneering, snotty... sneering, snotty. I mean, it projects exactly what he was at that time, and it's not all that appealing. I mean, it's interesting. I kind of like it. I think it's kind of cool, but really, it's kind of like he's doing this. It's kind of like he's giving the middle finger, and it's like, I'm cool. I don't really give it. I don't really care. Oh, and by the way, it's got a cool guitar solo. Yeah. And it does. It's got a great guitar solo. The B-side, the Custom Car Show, again, it's like you said. It's like melodically, it's not there. Thematically, it's good. Rhythmically, it's good. The guitar sounds on it are great, but it just does not have that, whatever that bliss that the Beach Boys had.
At that time, anyway, David did not have it. It's very clear, because, I mean, even listening to the Sunrays, who did not have it, had more it than David Marks had.
Right.
Just to be clear, I'm talking about David Marks at that time. When he was making music from 63 to 65, I'm just talking about that era.
Yeah. But it also kind of shows you those tracks, the released ones and the unreleased ones, that he was perfectly capable of handling the solos in the Beach Boys material.
Yeah.
It could have either been him or Carl. They could have been trading off. Yeah. But he was specifically told, Carl is the lead guitar player, your rhythm, and that's it. And if there's any spotlight given to a guitar player in this band, it's going to be Carl.
Yeah.
Well, that's got to be really frustrating because you listen to something like Sheriff of Nottingham, it's probably superior to any of the guitar playing like on Surfing USA or, anything from that period.
I'm not sure I'm in total agreement with you there, but it's certainly at least proficient as hell. I mean, at the very least, you can't argue that he wasn't successful at playing his instrument. He knew how to play his instrument. So here's where I've kind of pinpointed where it seems like a long, almost unending string of maybe not so great decisions start to pop up. The first one that I can, besides leaving the Beach Boys, around February 1964, Paul Revere pitched David to be in the band, and David turned them down, mainly from what I understand, because he didn't want to wear the colonial outfits that were required to be in that band. Is that true?
I think it's the tights, actually, that bothered him the most.
Which I can understand, of course.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, the Marksmen wound up, of course, not working out. We talked about the Sunrays and turning down involvement in the Sunrays and just taking work as a session guitarist for a few of the tunes and limiting his involvement to just that. And then around this point, Rodney Bingenheimer apparently was responsible for giving David his first hit of acid. I don't know what that prefigures.
I don't know if Rodney would ever confirm that now. Rodney's still around, but I don't know if he would.
Ladies and gentlemen, next time you bump into Rodney at Cantor's, where I've seen him, ask him, did you give David a hit of acid in an alley? Apparently this went down in an alley outside of a club, not sure which club. And if you get the answer, please let us know here in the hallowed halls of Discograffiti. This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. In early 71, after reuniting on stage in Boston with the Beach Boys, despite a chilly reception from both the public and Bruce Johnston, David received an offer from Mike Love to rejoin the band, but he declined when they demanded that he play bass. And Ed Carter wound up joining instead.
That was Carl's decision that David would be the bass player if he rejoined, yeah.
Right.
And David didn't like that.
And which I understand. And here's kind of where we leave off. Overall, like we said before, the way that David is seen is as the Pete Best of the Beach Boys. They're generally, and it doesn't help actually, that I started this year with a Pete Best interview, and then the next week was a David Marks interview, and that wasn't designed to show that there was some kind of similarity between the two. I just wanted to enter 2025 with a hot shit Beatle and then Beach Boy interview. I thought that was super cool, and I love that I was able to do that. Otherwise, one has nothing to do with the other. Admittedly, his solo post-Beach Boys output is very Bestian in its Beat-era ripoff mediocrity, but his place in the Beach Boys' legacy specifically has been toned down in a very unfair way. And their early sound is very indebted to what David brought to the table, and I will go down swinging any day for David. I definitely will, even though there has been a lot of weirdness and detritus left behind in my relationship with him, same with yours, but I will go down swinging for David and his reputation with this band, because without David, it wouldn't be the same band.
And I think proof of it was the 2012 reunion tour as well. I don't know how much you saw of that or are aware of that, but he was the most interesting part of that tour. I mean, it was great to see the surviving guys all together again.
I saw it at the Hollywood Bowl, and I agree with you wholeheartedly.
And that was probably one of his weakest shows.
Really?
It was like behind the scenes crap that had happened because he was being told the solos he was playing were getting away from the original solos, and he was being sort of admonished to get back to playing the solos exactly like they are on the records or whatever, which he can do.
Yeah.
I mean, see, that is the thing about Dave, and I can tell you this from personal direct experience. He's sitting down next to him with a guitar, in that he can play Carl's parts, his parts on those early records exactly, precisely, texturally, exactly like they were recorded and like they should sound. But it's boring to him to do that. But I can remember sitting him and playing like I was playing like in my room, and he's like, "Oh no, this is the way." And it's just like some slight little bit of a change in the neck and the way that I was approaching it. But it was just like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up because it was like Carl Wilson and David Marks were sitting next to me playing this in my room. There's a bootleg from them from '64 where they're in Australia and they play What I Say by Ray Charles. Have you ever heard that?
No, I haven't.
It's like this little riff. It's like a 2-string. Do, 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 do. And I mentioned something about What I Say, and he goes, "Oh yeah, we used to play it like this." And so this bootleg recording is well after he's out of the band, but he starts playing it, and it's precisely like Carl Wilson played that song on that Australian tour in 1964. I mean, it's just so perfect. And so he's on that 2012 tour, and the early gigs, we saw him at the New Orleans Jazz Festival. They headlined the New Orleans Jazz Festival, which was amazing. They had like 35,000 people watching them. And he's playing those solos, 409, whatever I get around. He's playing them exactly like the records. But a little farther into the tour, he's starting to improvise on those songs, and the solos are going, just a little bit more raw, ragged, maniacal.
Did he throw out a She's Real Fine, My 69 for you?
I don't know. I don't even know how much his vocals were in the mix, except he did sing lead on Get You Back. And I think early on he was singing a lead on Hawaii on that tour. But anyway, he was great on that tour. And there was, they were trying to keep him in the box again, the same kind of thing, like they had tried to keep him in before. And he was resisting it in the same way.
Yeah.
But there are some really cool moments. And one is where he plays the song Pet Sounds, and it's just him. Like they have an intermission, and then he comes out, and it's just, Darian and the backing band, which were, amazing. John Castle, Nelson Bragg, all those guys, amazing hybrid of Mike's band and Brian's bands playing. And they do the song Pet Sounds with David out front playing the guitar. Just David, none of the other Beach Boys out there. That is a real highlight if you can find the YouTube clips of that, because it's just like a beautiful moment. And then there's a Sail on Sailor clips too, where he's jamming the hell out of Sail on Sailor, playing stuff that isn't on the record.
Look, this is a fascinating person who's talented, and I can understand his frustration that he had with a piecemeal career that you have to really take a microscope to understand what was behind some of the decisions made most of the time during his life. But I find David to be an absolutely fascinating person, both in his life and in his work. Obviously you do too, or you wouldn't have written a book about him.
No, he's a complex person, but he is an intellectual. And you cannot say that about any of the Wilson brothers. You cannot say that about Mike Love. You cannot say that about Al Jardine. Those are the people.
Let's not forget Bruce Johnston, please.
Let's not. But David is his own worst enemy as well.
A lot of intellectuals follow that same path.
Was never good at promoting himself. Didn't really even understand what it was that was important that he had contributed. But on the other hand, he does feel wronged. And it's that, thing I told you about is the franchise thing, He was a part of that franchise. He was a part of the fingerprint, the stamp that was put into the popular culture. He is a part of that. He should have been rewarded for that.
Agreed. And this episode, in whatever tiny way, and the spotlight that's really cast down on David, who plays a significant part in this series, is, whatever tiny way that I have to be able to shine the spotlight down on a guy that history kind of forgot. And it's unfair, and hopefully this goes some way towards writing him back into the story.
I will just say I love David and leave it at that.
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week we've got an episode about the Beach Boys' classic LP, Shutdown Volume 2, featuring special guest Dennis Dykin. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, we've got a surprise free bonus show. This one, an introduction to one of my favorite recurring characters, David Beard, the editor-in-chief of Endless Summer Quarterly, the Beach Boys publication of record. This episode is his origin story with the magazine, as well as a peek around the bend, because as you'll plainly hear, we just can't help ourselves when the topic of smile is introduced. Then on Tuesday, the major tier gets a very special treat, an epic podcast about Brian Wilson's Outside Productions, featuring two amazing guests. David Beard, whose magazine is focusing on this very topic for an entire year straight, and the legendary Russ Titleman, who co-wrote both Guess I'm Dumb and Sherry She Needs Me with his friend Brian Wilson, and who will be spilling the beans on both of them with us. There will be a short sneak peek running for free on Tuesday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of the Shutdown Volume 2 podcast with Dennis Dykin. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everybody else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Jon Stebbins, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, Joe Kennedy for that killer new theme song, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to leap headfirst into the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104, Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87, Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84, Sweetwater is episode 79, a tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78, Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74, Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68, Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60, Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground, it's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod as 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, February 28th, we're coming at you with Shutdown Volume 2 with Dennis Dykin. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!